welcome to Literature Whispers. Earlier on the channel I read from Anton Chekhov, who often receives the accolade of the greatest Russian short story writer. Well, today I'm reading from an author who's often given that title for French literature, Guy de Maupassant. We're reading the story Clair de Lune, about a clergyman who sees God in everything, albeit kind of inconsistently. Make sure you give us a thumbs up so this gets out to more people. Let me know what you think of the story in the comments, or just say hello, let me know you're here. And without any further ado, let's get started. Clair de Lune. Abbé Marignon's martial name suited him well. He was a tall, thin priest, fanatical, excitable, and yet upright. All his beliefs were fixed, never varying. He believed sincerely that he knew his God, understood his plans, desires, and intentions. When he walked with long strides across the garden walk of his little country parsonage, he would sometimes ask himself the question, why has God done this? And he would dwell on this continually, putting himself in the place of God, and he almost invariably found an answer. He would never have cried out in an outburst of pious humility, "Thy ways, O Lord, are inscrutable." He said to himself, "I am the servant of God. It is right for me to know the reason for his deeds, or to guess it if I do not know it." Everything in nature seemed to him to have been created in accordance with admirable and absolute logic. The whys and becauses always balanced. Dawn was given to make our awakening pleasant, the days to ripen the harvest, the rains to moisten it, and the dark nights for sleep. The 4 seasons corresponded perfectly to the needs of agriculture, and no suspicion had ever come to the priest that nature in fact has no intentions, that, on the contrary, everything which exists must conform to the hard demands of seasons, climates, and matter. But he hated women, hated them unconsciously, and despised them by instinct. He often repeated the words of Christ, "Woman, what have I to do with thee?" And he would add, "It seems as though God himself were dissatisfied with this work of his." She was the tempter who led the first man astray, and who since then had ever been busy with her work of damnation. And even more than their sinful bodies, he hated their loving hearts. He had often felt their tenderness directed towards himself, and though he knew that he was invulnerable, he grew angry at this need of love that is always vibrating in them. According to his belief, God had created woman for the sole purpose of tempting and testing man. One must not approach her without defensive precautions and fear of possible snares. She was, indeed, just like a snare, with her lips open and her arms stretched out to man. He had no indulgence except for nuns, whom their vows had rendered inoffensive, but he was stern with them nevertheless, because he felt that at the bottom of their fettered and humble hearts the everlasting tenderness was burning brightly, that tenderness which was shown even to him, a priest. He felt this cursed tenderness, even in their docility, in the low tones of their voices when speaking to him, in their lowered eyes, and in their resigned tears when he reproved them roughly. And he would shake his cassock on leaving the convent doors, and walk off, lengthening his stride as though flying from danger. He had a niece who lived with her mother in a little house near him. He was bent upon making her a sister of charity. She was a pretty, brainless madcap. When the abbé preached she laughed, and when he was angry with her she would give him a hug, drawing him to her heart, while he sought unconsciously to release himself from this embrace which nevertheless filled him with a sweet pleasure, giving him the sensation of paternity which slumbers in every man. Often, when walking by her side along the country road, he would speak to her of God, of his God. She never listened to him, but looked about her at the sky, the grass and flowers, and one could see the joy of life sparkling in her eyes. Sometimes she would dart forward to catch some flying creature, crying out as she brought it back, "Look, uncle, how pretty it is. I want to hug it." And this desire to hug flies or lilac blossoms disquieted, angered, or roused the priest, who saw, even in this, the ineradicable tenderness that is always budding in women's hearts. Then there came a day when the sexton's wife, who kept house for the Abbé Marignan, told him, with caution, that his niece had a lover. Almost suffocated by the fearful emotion this news roused in him, he stood there, his face covered with soap, for he was in the act of shaving. When he had sufficiently recovered to think and speak, he cried, "It is not true. You lie, Melanie." But the peasant woman put her hand on her heart, saying, "May our Lord judge me if I lie, Monsieur le Curé. I tell you, she goes there every night when your sister has gone to bed. They meet by the riverside. You have only to go there and see, between 10 o'clock and midnight." He ceased scraping his chin, and began to walk up and down impetuously, as he always did when he was in deep thought. When he began shaving again, he cut himself 3 times. All day long he was silent, full of anger and indignation. To his priestly hatred of this invincible love was added the exasperation of a spiritual father, of a guardian and pastor, deceived and tricked by a child, and the selfish emotion shown by parents when their daughter announces that she has chosen a husband without them and in spite of them. After dinner he tried to read a little, but could not, growing more and more angry. When 10 o'clock struck, he seized a formidable oak stick, which he was accustomed to carry on his nocturnal walks when visiting the sick, and he smiled at the enormous club which he twirled in a threatening manner in his strong country fist. Then he raised it suddenly and, clenching his teeth, brought it down on a chair, the broken back of which fell over on the floor. He opened the door to go out, but stopped on the threshold, surprised by the splendid moonlight, of such brilliance as is seldom seen. And, as he was gifted with an emotional nature, one such as had those poetic dreamers, the fathers of the church, he felt suddenly distracted and moved by all the grand and serene beauty of this pale night. In his little garden, bathed in soft light, its fruit trees in a row cast on the ground the shadow of their slender branches, scarcely in full leaf, while the giant honeysuckle, clinging to the wall of his house, exhaled a delicious sweetness, filling the warm, moonlit atmosphere with a kind of perfumed soul. He began to take long breaths, drinking in the air as drunkards drink wine, and he walked along slowly, delighted, marvelling, almost forgetting his niece. As soon as he was outside the garden, he stopped to gaze upon the plain, all flooded with the caressing light, bathed in that tender, languishing charm of serene nights. At each moment was heard the short, metallic note of the cricket, and distant nightingales shook out their scattered notes, their light, vibrant music that sets one dreaming, without thinking, a music made for kisses, for the seduction of moonlight. The Abbé walked on again, his heart failing, though he knew not why. He seemed weakened, suddenly exhausted. He wanted to sit down, to rest there, to think, to admire God in his works. Beyond, following the undulations of the little river, a great line of poplars wound in and out, a fine mist, a white haze through which the moonbeams passed, silvering it and making it gleam, hung around and above the mountains, covering all the tortuous course of the water with a kind of light and transparent cotton wool. The priest stopped once again, his soul filled with a growing and irresistible tenderness. And a doubt, a vague feeling of disquiet came over him. He was asking one of those questions that he sometimes put to himself. Why did God make this? Since the night is destined for sleep, unconsciousness, repose, forgetfulness of everything, why make it more charming than day, softer than dawn or evening? And why does this seductive planet, more poetic than the sun, that seems destined, so discreet it is, to illuminate things too delicate and mysterious for the light of day, make the darkness so transparent? Why does not the greatest of feathered songsters sleep like the others? Why does it pour forth its voice in the mysterious night? Why this half veil cast over the world? Why these tremblings of the heart, this emotion of the spirit, this enervation of the body? Why this display of enchantments that human beings do not see, since they are lying in their beds? For whom is destined this sublime spectacle, this abundance of poetry cast from heaven to earth? And the abbé could not understand. But out there, on the edge of the meadow, under the arch of trees bathed in a shining mist, two figures were walking side by side. The man was the taller, and held his arm about his sweetheart's neck and kissed her brow every little while. They imparted life all at once to the placid landscape in which they were framed as by a heavenly hand. The two seemed but a single being, the being for whom was destined this calm and silent night, and they came towards the priest as a living answer, the response his master sent to his questionings. He stood still, his heart beating, all upset, and it seemed to him that he saw before him some biblical scene, like the love of Ruth and Boaz, the accomplishment of the will of the Lord, in some of those glorious stories of which the sacred books tell. The verses of the Song of Songs began to ring in his ears, the appeal of passion, all the poetry of this poem replete with tenderness. And he said unto himself, perhaps God has made such nights as these to idealize the love of man. He shrank back from the two who stood advanced with arms intertwined. Yes, it was his niece, but he asked himself now if he would not be disobeying God. And does not God permit love, since he surrounds it with such visible splendour? And he went back musing, almost ashamed, as if he had intruded into a temple where he had no right to enter. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, please consider clicking subscribe and the little bell so that you get notifications when I make a new upload. If you liked this story specifically, it is in the public domain, so if you search the title you should be able to find the text digitally online. But if you wanted a good quality physical collection to read it from, I'll leave a link in the description where you can get hold of one. And if you wanted to watch another one of my videos, I would be delighted. I mentioned Chekhov, so let's leave a link here to a Chekhov short story, and I'll see you in the next video.